Good morning, and today I have a friend with me. This is Nessie. Nessie's like my support grandkitty. She's not very happy right now. No, she's not. But anyway, we're going to talk about mood disorders for a second, and we're going to talk about two major ones. We're going to talk about depression and bipolar disorder, and what some of the differences are between them, and some of the warning signs about when somebody might be really reacting Oh, Nessie, it's okay. Yes, it's all right. Oh, she might bite me because she's not really happy. She's not really making a good emotional support animal right now, mainly because she's unhappy. So I'll let her down. All right. I could, in fact, switch support animals. This is Callie. Maybe she'll take it a little bit better. She's a little bit there. Say hi, Callie. All right. See, because sometimes when you are depressed or upset, these guys can helpful. These can be very, very helpful. And one of the reasons we do have therapy animals. All right. So let's talk for a little bit about depression and what makes depression different from just everyday garden variety sadness. I mean, these are disorders where we all have some of these symptoms. Again, we talked about abnormality, whatever. We all have some of these signs at some point in our lives. We all feel sad. We all feel hopeless and helpless and worthless and whatever. Those are common symptoms, all right? When does it become something else? When does it become major depression? And there's a couple of things that we're looking at. Again, going back to our signs and symptoms of what we consider to be again, a disorder versus just, and not hate the word normal, but just normal stuff. All right, so a couple things that we're looking for here. First of all, let's just run down again those symptoms. We talked about the feelings, but then there's behaviors as well. We have, maybe a problem with not necessarily eating or sleeping in the way that you usually would. Some people do more or less, but there's a disruption in the normal patterns of that. We can talk about something called suicidal ideation. That's thinking about, sometimes it just means thinking about being dead, wishing that it was over, not necessarily. And then there's people that are actively suicidal, which is different. So social withdrawal, refusing to participate in anything, lack of interest or excitement or happiness about anything. There's a fancy name for that called anhedonia, which means nothing just makes me feel happy. Right, so those are some of the major signs. And again, we all feel like that sometimes, especially if something happened that's not very good. All right, when does it become a major depression? One of the major things is the length of time that this is going on. All right, something happens, you might feel bad for a couple of days or even longer, maybe, but you usually, get back to normal at some point, or at least normal activity. People with major depression don't. It goes on for longer than 2 weeks, and they're majorly maladaptive. They're not getting out, they're not going to work, they're not going out with their friends, they're not doing this for an extended period of time. Now, again, that is flexible. Clearly, if someone is actively suicidal and that happens within 2 days, you don't wake someone 2 weeks, all right? But that's a rule of thumb that we're talking about. And again, that level of severity. It's one thing to just have a down day. It's another thing to have that to the point where you can't go out of your house for weeks on end. All right, depression is common. It's something we all have. Again, we all, I think, can understand depression. The other thing to think about is whether there is an obvious cause. Now, this is not necessarily something that would go into the diagnosis of depression or not, but it's something to think about when we talk about treatments. So sometimes we have a person who has all those symptoms and there really is nothing there that's triggering it to that point. They may say, we all can come up with something horrible. I mean, right now we're in the middle of this. We all feel kind of down about being stuck and worrying about sickness. But it might be but the level of depression is out of proportion to it. In these cases, you might be thinking that this is more of a chemical issue going on. On the other hand, sometimes there is a major trigger. You might have someone with a grief reaction that's going on for a long period of time, or a traumatic event, and now they feel like this. Still could be. We think that the best way, or the most modern way of thinking right now is that depression and all these disorders have a strong biological component. When, talking about being predisposed to certain things genetically, having an imbalance of chemicals in your brain. But that's not enough. That also something in life has maybe triggered it. So people predisposed are more likely to do that when something happens. But you have all variations in there. And so that in itself is not necessarily the definition of depression, but it is something to think about when you're talking about treatment. We know medications, antidepressants, SSRIs, can work very well. They don't work for everybody. The same one doesn't work for someone. There's variations, but therapy also. But one of the ways we deal with this, and one of the reasons why medication is often recommended, is because when people are in the very, very depths of depression, they oftentimes are not really in the mind space to be able to get much from therapy. They're so down and they're so depressed that they aren't able to really focus on the therapy. You know this. I'm going to think about sometime when you're really, really, really sad. It's hard to be rational. Those irrational thoughts just come. And if somebody says something to you like, oh, you're fine, it'll get better. It doesn't help. It just doesn't help. It doesn't make you feel any better. All right, so medication can sometimes help that mood a little bit to the point where you might be more conducive to the benefits of therapy. All right, and the other thing to think about when we're talking about depression is to be very, very aware of that threat of suicide. There are myths around suicide that people that are going to do it won't talk about it. That's not true, and it's certainly not something you can count on. Many people who eventually do hurt themselves will say something or do something that is suggestive. For example, giving away their things. Acting all of a sudden happy, like a major uplift. Sometimes people, when they're in the very, very depths of depression, are so lacking in energy they don't follow through. When they start to seem all of a sudden better, like suddenly, that's going to be a red flag. Either that they're getting better and now they've made that decision and they feel better about it, or they have the energy back to do it. So you have to be very, very careful about that. The only way of really knowing for sure if someone is just kind of, it's in their head versus someone who's actively suicidal is to ask them. And that is uncomfortable. And nobody wants to go up to a friend or a family member and ask them point blank, are you thinking, about hurting yourself? But you have to, because this is the only way. And to be fair, sometimes they won't. There are some people who mean it and won't tell you, but some of them will. Some of them want help. Sometimes it's just, trust me, you're not going to put that feeling or that thought in their head. But what it does is it makes people know that you do care. And it might go a long way, and you might be surprised that they will talk, and they might. So this is just something that as therapists we do, but definitely, even a friend can do. But to take it seriously. Don't assume anything. All right, the other mood or affect disorder that is fairly common is what we call bipolar. This is what in years past Jimi Hendrix called manic depression, but this is bipolar. Bi means two moods. So you have those periods of depression, and most people with bipolar tend to be more in the depression areas. But then there are alternating what we call manic episodes. Manic episode, the best way of describing a manic episode is almost like someone's on speed. They have like heightened energy, especially when you're contrasting it to that very low energy of depression. So it's not necessarily feelings of happiness, but the moods are extreme. So people can have, sometimes it's anger. All of a sudden they just lash out and they're angry about things. They often are somewhat delusional. They have a lot of megalomaniacal thoughts that they're going to do this and they can do this and have all this energy and I'm going to solve all these world problems and they don't sleep, they don't eat. So it's a heightened energy. And again, it's often seems, maybe worse than it even is sometimes because it's in contrast to these down periods. All right, there's variations of bipolar. For our purposes, we're not going to get into them. But most of them, I would say, again, are people that are more in the depression and then have some manic episodes, maybe one, maybe two, maybe not that often. Very rarely is this a person who is cycling through these quickly. This is not someone who's just moody. We're not talking about someone who's really happy right now and then an hour later. That's normally not what we're seeing with bipolar. We're talking about much more extremes in mood. This is also potentially dangerous because not only we have the suicidal problem in the depression, but people in the manic episodes might be so energetic, so out of touch with reality, they're not sleeping, they're not rational, that they can do some really stupid things, things that normally they may have thought through. So they can be in danger even in the manic episodes, not necessarily on purpose, but just, for example, they may be so preoccupied with something that they walk out into traffic. So this is also one. All right, we know bipolar, again, has a strong genetic component, reacts pretty well to medications. These are mood drugs we today call usually mood stabilizers, although antidepressants and antipsychotic-based drugs are similar and work too. In years past, lithium was the main drug of choice for bipolar, but lithium has some nasty side effects, and that's why we've kind of switched over to some other medications. So those are the two major mood affect disorders that we're going to talk about in intro. Again, those are ones that are a lot more common maybe than schizophrenia. So chances are pretty good that you might find someone with these. And again, your service animals, although mine have now abandoned me, might help you. All right, that's it for now. Thank you.